Past exam question on repricing gap, part 2, solving the question. The first question you have to answer is to compute the 1-year basic repricing gap and then to use it to find the change in the bank's net interest income. You are told that you have 360 days in a year, and the definition of the gap is this. You should know it because it's not given in the question, but we have been through this in video number 1, and also in video number 1 we found out that demand loans, floating rate securities and fixed rate loans are the rate sensitive assets. Demand deposit, fixed rate deposit and floating rate bonds are the interest rate sensitive liabilities, and in the question you're given this formula. Okay, so G, the gap, is the sum of all interest rate assets minus the sum of all interest rate liabilities. So we found that the interest rate sensitive assets and liabilities are here. They are reproduced in this column, so you can use this one if you want. It's easier. So all you have to do is add up these numbers, subtract the second from the first, and you get a gap of minus $1,450 million, billion dollars, whatever the currency and scale is. All you have to do now is plug in this formula, so your G comes here. The change in rate is given to you in the question, so all you have to do now is take your calculator and you get a basic repricing gap of minus 7.25 million dollars or dollars, whatever the currency is. Question 2. You have to calculate the 1-year maturity adjusted gap and then the change in the bank's net income, interest income. You're given this formula, which was explained to you in part 1, so I'm not going through this again. All I'm doing is writing this expanded, so the sum is expanded here, and I have adjusted it to the fact that we have 3 interest rate sensitive assets and 3 interest rate sensitive liabilities. Yeah. So how do you use it? First of all, you have to adjust it to the fact that all your data are in days, and the formula, as I explained in the first video, is given in a generic format in year. So the 1 you see in the formula has to become 360 because the 1 is in fact 1 for 1 year. Yeah. The question hints that you have to divide P by 360. In fact, it's not P, it's this whole bracket that you divide by 360 because it's 360 days in a year. So I've done that here. I've divided all the brackets by 360. Okay. Next, you have to replace the P's by their values. Now, let's recap. This is what you take. This are the relevant assets and liabilities, and the P's are given in this column here. So, yeah, 1, 2, 3. So that's the PI. This is P1, this is P2, this is P3. So you're going to take 0 and replace it here, and I've done it already. Now this P2, well, it's going to be 90. Yeah. P3 is 270, and you repeat for the liabilities. Yeah. So 180 is P2 and 360 is P3. I have also replaced the values of the interest rate sensitive assets and liabilities. So the first one, SA1, as you can see here, is 900. I've put it there, but this bit is exactly the same as the gap. Yeah. So if you replace all the letters by the numbers, well, what you can do now is take your calculator and calculate the gap, which here is minus $832.5 millions of dollars or billions of dollars whatever the scale and currency is. So you haven't finished, because your next step for the same question is to calculate the bank's net interest income, but the formula is the same. So the formula we were given before is in the first question was this one. So change in net interest payment is the gap times delta R. Here you have a different gap. You have a maturity adjusted gap, but the formula to find the change in the net interest income is the same. All you have to do is change the gap to the gap adjusted by maturity, but the rest doesn't change. So this is still 0.5%. GMA, you found it already, is minus $832.5 millions of dollars of billions, and you get a change in net interest income of minus $4.16 billion or whatever. Question number 3. Repeat, but this time you need to find the standardized gap. The formula is here. All you have to do is plug in the values in the table. Yeah. So this actually has to be divided by 360. Yeah. So all of them, and actually I should have done it before, because it's simply the repeat of the maturity adjusted gap. So I've done it here. And I have replaced all the values of the sensitive assets, yeah, here, and sensitive liabilities here, 680 and 110. Okay, I replace the P's, P1, P2, P3. So that was done in question number 2. There's nothing new here. The only new part is the beta. So beta 1 is 0.8, beta 2 is 1, and this is beta 3. Yeah, so compare the formula in this slide with the one in the previous one. For the liabilities, you have gamma 1 is 0.5, gamma 2 is 0.8, and gamma 3 is 1. Once you have plugged in all the values in the formula, all you have to do is take your calculator and calculate the standardized gap, which is 39.5 amounts of currency. Finally, you plug it in the same formula that you were given before in question 1, but now your gap is different. Yes, so it's the standardized gap that we have found previously. This is still 0.5%, there's no change, and if you calculate this multiplication, you get $0.1975 millions of dollars or billions, whatever the scale and currency is. Okay, question 4, compare the differences. So I've written here the 3 changes in net interest income that we have found, and the first thing you notice immediately is that you have an increase from minus 7.25, so let's assume it's dollars to make it simpler, to $0.1975. Okay, so you have an increase from a loss to a gain. Fine. The other thing you notice is that you have an increase in precision. So you have a very basic measure of gap, which is essentially assets minus liabilities. So it's a very rough measure. Yeah, because you're abstracting for a lot of things. You're removing the issue that you have different maturities, you have different interest rate, and so on. So this is like G, I would call it the back of the envelope calculation, the quick and dirty. You have something more precise that is the maturity adjusted, because it's going to be G plus the maturity risk, if you want. And I put this in quotation marks because there is a definition of maturity risk, but essentially is the risk that you incur because you have a mismatch between the maturities of your liabilities and your assets. And this is exactly what's happening here. If you ignore that, you can have a higher or lower change in your net interest income. And the third measure of gap is simply the maturity adjusted plus the sensitivity TVT of rates to market rate. So we have seen in video number 1, so in part 1, that you have different market rates in the interbank market. The most famous one, you've heard of them, is the LIBOR and Euribor. So the LIBOR is a global interest rate for any amounts in any of the major currencies. Euribor is the same principle, so it's the rate banks charge each other for loans in euro. You have a rate in every market, basically. In Shanghai, you have the Shanghai interbank rate. You have Hong Kong interbank rate. You have the Mumbai interbank rate. So each market has an interbank rate. Now, if you have a loan or an asset or liability that is in euro, well, the relevant market rate for you may not be the LIBOR, it will be the Euribor. It won't be the Japanese interbank rate. So if the Japanese interbank rate changes, how is it going to affect your net interest income? Very little, yeah, unless for some particular reason the interest rate you're charging for this particular loan is very sensitive to the Japanese interbank market. But essentially, you have what I want to say here is that you have an increase in precision and detail when you go from G to... It is summarized in this slide, so I won't go through it. You can read it later if you want. Yeah, so everything you want to write about it, at least a summary. You could say much more, but this is the minimum you can say to answer this question. I would like to finish by focusing on what I think is important, is to make sure you understand the problem-solving strategy, because everything I've seen here depends on the particular parameters of this exercise. One of them is that you have 360 days in a year and not 365. So when you answer the actual exam question, if this question is in the exam, the first thing you have to do is to check that, yeah, because it's going to be plugged in all the formulas. The second is even more important. This second step is the one that will make or break your answer, because you have to make sure you identify all the interest rate sensitive assets and liabilities. Once you have done that, you have to adapt your formulas. And well, this is a bit tricky if you're not familiar with symbolic math, but I gave you in this video and the previous one 2 examples. So here you have 3 assets, 3 liabilities. In the previous you have 3 assets and 2 liabilities. But if in the exam question you have 4 assets and 3 liabilities, well, for the part of the formula of GMA and G standardized where you have the assets, you will have to add beta 4 times SA4 times 1 minus P4, and beta, S, A and P will be given in the table. If you have less, then you have to take the formula that are given here and you have to delete the ones that you don't need. But essentially, before using it, you have to adapt it. And the last step, which is the simplest, is to plug in the numbers. So 1 to 3 is really important, and spend a lot of time on it, because once you've got that right, 4 comes very easily. This is the answer you were given in My Learning. Make sure that these numbers match what you have seen in the videos, and this is the table. The difference between the table in the question and in the answer is this column here.